Good afternoon. I could officially now say it's 12:01. Good afternoon, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name's Mary Waldron. I'm the executive director. I'm the proud executive director of Old Colony Planning Council. I am always really the privilege of overseeing 27 staff people that work here at Old Colony Planning Council. We are regional planning agencies. We are one of 13 across the state of Massachusetts. But we're also proud to be a strong partner with Plymouth County. And I know Frank Baz was going to be saying a few words, specifically Joanne Zigman's leadership from OCPC and working with all of the partners is nothing shy of amazing. And we're so proud to be officially be calling her your principal planner now at Old Colony Planning Council. So her title has changed, elevating her and to continue to do the great work with all of you. And I know so many of you on here, from Boys and Girls Club to Marian Institute to others. Thank you for being on. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this on to Frank Bassler. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mary. And Plymouth County is very proud of the collaboration between OCPC, the Marian Institute, and Barrett Planning, and many others, as the plan directly addresses a major concern that the Plymouth County Commissioners have identified. That county will continue to look for ways to address local challenges with regional solutions, and we look forward to the implementation of this very important plan. Joanne Zigman will come up next and tell us about Day.
Hi, folks. Brenna, if you could share the slides, we can start the deck. Just to reiterate what was already said, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. We'll be looking forward to roughly about a half an hour of presentations from several members of our team who will introduce themselves as they begin their parts. My name is Joanne Zigman with Old Colony Planning Council. The project, with a very long title, is officially the Resilient Food System Action Plan for the Plymouth County area. This has been a roughly 2-year project that has been very exciting to work on. We call it the Plymouth County area because it is mostly Plymouth County, as you can see on the map on this slide. But we do have a couple of extra communities that are also part of the project area, either because they're part of the Old Colony region or because geographically it just made sense to include them. So it does cover all 31 municipalities. You'll hear more about the process today, about how we engaged across the whole region. Several project partners, Old Colony Planning Council and Plymouth County, more than 2 years ago now, applied to the state to receive a grant through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. That program we really have to thank for making all of this possible. We also received donations from Beth Israel Deaconess Plymouth, as well as the Harbor One Foundation, to help support this important work. And then we partnered with the Marian Institute, who will introduce themselves in a little bit, to bring additional expertise into the area, and Barrett Planning Group, our consulting partner, who also really led the effort to put this plan into a reality. So today's presentation will talk more about the process, what we've done over the past couple years that have ultimately led to the resulting draft plan that we're going to also talk about. So we'll review some of the draft goals that are in this plan, and talk about some of the objectives and actions that have come out of it as well. And what we're looking from all of you for today really is your feedback, comments, suggestions, things that we might have missed, things that we got right. These are all, and I emphasize the word draft kind of continuously, this is all still a draft. So the next 3 weeks through to June 24 is really our opportunity to further refine what we've put together. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Alyssa. One of the things
Rita, I think is next.
Rita, is Rita on yet? Rita, are you here with us yet? I don't think she's here yet, Brenna. So I think we'll skip over and start with Alyssa. So one of the really cool things about this project is we got to work with a lot of partners, and Alyssa not only works for OCPC, but she also just completed a master's at MIT in planning. So her entire thesis was focused on food insecurity in our project area. So all of her findings, which she'll talk about, have fed into the development of this plan. So over to you, Alyssa.
Hi, thank you so much. So, yes, my name is Alyssa Papantanakis, and so I spent the last few months here conducting interviews and assessing physical conditions to understand the impacts of a natural disaster on the emergency food provision system within our region. So, thinking here specifically about things like food pantries, meal markets, and similar services to that. I have up on the screen a number of the main themes that came up throughout this research. And instead of thinking about each of those different vulnerabilities separately, I want to walk through with you all a quick vignette that reflects what I heard across multiple different food providers throughout this process. So keep in mind here, not every single individual organization has experienced each of these challenges, but at least someone in the system did speak to each of these effects. So imagine that a winter storm hits, much like the ones that affected Plymouth County this past winter. The roads aren't cleared yet, so deliveries can't get through, meaning the pantry doesn't receive or faces delays from its typical food providers. At the same time, the building loses power. Without generators, the refrigeration goes down, and some of the food that they did have is now unsafe to eat. Staff and volunteers, who tend to be older and might face particular mobility challenges, aren't able to come in safely, so there aren't as many people available to respond to these issues. And even if the pantry tries to stay open, people can't easily reach it, since roads and parking lots aren't cleared yet and public transportation faces delays and cancellations. In some cases, staying open might not even be an option, especially when pantries operate within other facilities like churches or community centers where the decisions aren't their own to make. Each of these vulnerabilities is going to pile on top of each other, and it might take weeks for a pantry to recover and return to its normal operations. And at the same time, many are at risk of another disaster in the near future, whether that's another winter storm in the season or something else. So just as some examples of some risks that we're facing, 4 of the region's providers are located in flood zones, 7 overlap with hurricane inundation zones, and about half are located on the hottest land in our region. Can we change slides? Yes. Thank you. So the resilience attributes that are up on the screen here are adopted from the Johns Hopkins Resilience Framework, and they offer a lens for us to think about some of the characteristics that might help individual organizations in the broader system to respond and grow when they face a disaster. So a resilient system would have redundancy. That's multiple or duplicative food system elements that can serve the same purpose. That way, when one site is impacted, others are able to step in. It also has diversity, so that's a variety of food system elements that can serve a similar but not necessarily the same purpose. That way, we're including different types of providers and distribution models like delivery services or drive-through options so that the system isn't relying on a singular approach. You'd see preparedness, so clear documented plans that are adopted in advance in order to guide organizations during an event on how to ensure things like food access, availability, and accessibility are present. We also would have access to capital reserves. So those are backup resources that are available to be used during a disruption, giving them the capacity to respond when something goes wrong. That might include things like financial or backup food reserves, like the way that we would usually think about this term, but it also might be more relationship-based, like social or political reserves, or maybe natural, thinking about the ways that the land that a pantry is located on provides additional capacity for them. The system would also display strong connectivity. So that's communicating and coordinating with other organizations, suppliers, and municipal representatives, helping us to increase the flow of resources and information across the whole system. And then overall, their approaches would be rooted in flexibility. So adjusting elements like their hours, their locations, or their distribution models during a disruption in order to meet the changing needs and conditions that are at play. So based on my conversations, it seems that there are lots of examples of each of these resilience attributes across the region, but they do tend to exist at the organizational level rather than at the system level, which leads to uneven adoption, with smaller pantries generally struggling to keep up. It's also worth noting here that existing responses to disasters are largely reactive rather than proactive. So attributes like flexibility are particularly strong, but we're generally seeing weaknesses in other areas like preparedness. We change slides again. Thank you. So this process overall led to a menu list of different options that local and regional governments might use to support the resiliency of this system. Greater detail on each of these recommendations is going to be available on our website. And I don't want to get too in the weeds with you all here, but these recommendations largely fall into 4 different categories. So the first of those is planning integration. So things like bringing emergency food providers in as key stakeholders and addressing their needs through hazard mitigation plans or other local planning processes, as well as assessing the use of town-owned land for pantry use. We also are thinking about funding and resources, so things like supporting grant writing processes and establishing external emergency relief funding reserves. And then coordination. So here we're thinking about things like assigning municipal points of contacts to work with their local providers and establishing larger communication systems to facilitate regular touch points across the system. And then finally, education. So offering trainings and information to emergency food providers and suppliers in areas like emergency planning, disaster response, grant writing, and MIFAP involvement. That's all I have. Thank you, everyone. Do we have Rita on now to pass it off, or?
We do. We had some technical difficulties, so she had to join by phone. Rita, can you hear us? Rita, are you there? I see that she's unmuted herself. She might be having some audio issues. Why don't we continue with the Barrett component of the presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to work out Rita after that.
Okay, Jill, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jill Slankus. I'm a principal planner at Barrett Planning Group. And I'll be speaking about a little bit of the context of why another plan and what the plan is before we go into what the plan found, what this effort found. The need for this plan is immediate. Across the Plymouth County area, more residents are experiencing food insecurity, farmland continues to be lost to development, and key industries such as cranberry farming, commercial fishing, and aquaculture are facing increasing challenges from climate change, rising costs, and an aging workforce. This action plan provides a roadmap for strengthening the region's food system over the next 10 years. It brings together data, community input, and existing efforts to identify strengths, address vulnerabilities, and support a more resilient local food economy. The recommendations build on work already underway at the local, regional, and state levels and align with broader food system and farmland protection goals across Massachusetts. Most importantly, this is a living document that can adapt over time as conditions change, helping guide future investments, partnerships, and actions to support a strong and resilient food system for the Plymouth County area. Next slide, please. What is a resilient food system action plan? Well, food system includes everyone and everything involved in getting food from where it is produced to our tables. That includes farmers, fishermen and women, food processors, distributors, retailers, restaurants, food assistance organizations, consumers, and even the systems that manage food waste. In other words, it's the entire network that helps produce, move, sell, and access food. As mentioned earlier, this plan focuses on the 31 communities in the Plymouth County area. And it's important to remember that our local food system is connected to much larger systems. While we produce a variety of food locally, most of the food consumed in the region comes from elsewhere. Likewise, much of what is produced here is sold outside the region. Locally produced food accounts for only a small share of total food spending in Massachusetts. Many factors influence our food system, including the economy, transportation, housing, public health, environmental conditions, and public policy. When we talk about resilience, we're talking about the ability of our food system to adapt and continue functioning during challenges such as severe weather, economic disruptions, or supply chain interruptions, some of which Alyssa had spoken about earlier. A resilient food system has diverse sources of food, strong local infrastructure, and strong partnerships among producers, businesses, organizations, and communities. Building that resilience is a central goal of this action plan. Next slide, please. So for those who haven't opened or accessed the plan, or when you do, sort of understanding the plan and the major components. The plan's organized into several sections that move from community input to action. It begins by describing the public and stakeholder engagement process and summarizes the key themes and concerns that emerge from those conversations. The plan then examines the current state of the local food system, including its agricultural, economic, environmental, and infrastructure components, and identifies the major challenges and opportunities in the region. Finally, the action plan presents goals, strategies, and recommended actions to strengthen the resilience of the local food system over the next 10 or so years. Okay, I'll pass this along to Brenna. Next slide, Brenna, if you're there.
Sometimes it doesn't go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the participation process throughout this plan. Like Joanne mentioned earlier, this whole process took place over approximately 2 years and was a collaboration across OCPC, Plymouth County, Marion Institute, and Barrett Planning Group through an MVP grant and a couple other funding sources like Joanne mentioned. So participation across this process started with a visioning group in Plymouth County to identify the need for this plan, which then formed a project team and several public advisory groups, including the steering committee and the CAB. One of the major pieces of public participation was a public survey that reached over 1,400 different responses, including almost 150 food-related businesses. The project team conducted 72 interviews with stakeholders, which gave us such an understanding of people's lived experiences, and they were so generous with their time and expertise in this effort. We also had focus groups, 6 focus groups that were hosted both virtually and online through sector-specific surveys, which reached 29 responses. We conducted 8 site visits across the region. There were 11 CAB meetings, 10 steering committees. We went to the SNEACS conference earlier this year and went to MDAR listening sessions. And so all of those different pieces together helped gain a broader understanding of what's going on in the region, who is there, what are their issues, and what do they see as the strengths and challenges of the local food system. So from this, we found a couple different major key findings. Working lands and waters are under extreme pressure. Only 2% of the farmland in the study area was permanently protected in some fashion, and farmland acreage has continued to decline, which we can see from agricultural census data and what we're hearing from folks. At the same time, land values have risen dramatically, making farms and aquaculture and fisher people at risk of losing their businesses, which ties into the fragility of farm viability. Most farms in the area report that they operate at a net loss, or they only make a small profit. A very small share of food businesses believe that they earn a sufficient profit from this work, and many producers are nearing retirement age with few pathways towards retirement or towards succession and passing that business on to another farmer. There is a missing middle of infrastructure for the food system. There's no dedicated food hub within the project area. There's only one identified shared commercial kitchen. There's limited processing, cold storage, aggregation, and dockside seafood infrastructure. That makes it challenging for producers to connect to markets. Food insecurity is a real and rising threat. Between 2024 and 2025, food insecurity rose 10% in the region to now 40% of area households have some form of food insecurity. And this mostly falls on older adults, low-income households, renters, residents with no vehicle access, and communities of color. Many residents eligible for assistance programs don't always use the ones available to them, and many who are in need of such assistance are not eligible for current programs. And like Alyssa talked about earlier, the system is ill-prepared for disruptions. And while the state has done a lot of planning for food and farming and fishing, at this level, these topics are largely absent from municipal planning processes. And the tie-in of food to other emergency planning is limited. So what we heard also lined up with the data that we saw as well. That the Plymouth County area's local food system is shaped by a wide range of interconnected economic, environmental, social, and policy conditions that are influencing how food is produced, processed, distributed, sold, and accessed across the region. From trends in agricultural and seafood production, working land use and development, infrastructure, food access, climate resilience, supply chains, and local policies. And what we saw from a lot of this secondary research is that the goal of having a self-reliant regional food system is an existing goal in food system planning efforts across Massachusetts, New England, and other areas across the country. Past system planning efforts in New England, specifically in Massachusetts, have consistently emphasized the importance of strengthening the regional food system, its resilience, and the connections to local food production, consumption, and the collaboration across many different organizations. Massachusetts has some of the highest spending on local food at almost $55 billion in 2022. And this is the highest across any state in New England, but less than 3% of the total spending of food in general is this money spent on local food and alcohol. Those are regionally sourced products. So in the Plymouth County area, people are spending a lot of money on food, but that food is not from this area. So in New England, Massachusetts, and Plymouth County specifically plays a really important role in cranberry production and aquaculture production. For cranberries, about 90% of the state's cranberry acreage is located in the project area, and some of the most productive and profitable ports in the state are located in the area or adjacent. New Bedford is the most profitable and by volume and value port in New England, and also for several years in a row in the United States. So cranberries and aquaculture play a really important role in the economy and culture of the area. There are a lot of strengths that we found in this research. There are very productive agricultural lands. The area has about 12% of the total farmland in the state, and some of those are some of the best farmland in the state. There are active fishing and aquaculture industries, strong community organizations, and a growing consumer interest in local food and understanding where the food comes from and playing a larger part in their local food system. But the pressures with high land costs, farmland loss, development pressures, extreme weather, climate change, and infrastructure limitations, those are major challenges that we saw in the region as well. So I will pass it to Lydia to talk about some of the key findings.
Sure. Thank you, Brenna. So the key findings, and Brenna kind of touched on these earlier, but these findings were really heard throughout our study process. And they also have been the core areas that we've built the goals and action plan on. So the first is really about the need for protecting land, water, and production capacity being very urgent. You hear this all the time, but once land is gone, it's gone, and you no longer have the ability to produce food regionally. And so this was both noted in surveys and interviews, but also there are many plans around farmland in particular that we use to understand this. Both American Farmland Trust and then MDAR's Farmland Action Plan are really important components for driving this key finding. And it really is what the first and most urgent issue that we really see in the region. The second is that processing, storage, distribution, and aggregation infrastructure does have gaps within the study area, in the project area. So this is a theme throughout New England. And while there are processing options and storage and aggregation options within a reasonable drive they are lacking in the project area. And in order to have a more resilient system, as Alyssa was talking about earlier, you need to have that infrastructure, especially if routes are closed due to storms or if you're experiencing long-term power outages, things like that. But also just to be able to build more viability, having that infrastructure allows for more capacity within the food system. And then Alyssa touched on this, but food access challenges are increasing and they're unevenly distributed. We're seeing this across Massachusetts, but it is really, really important to note that this is an increasing challenge. It's not going away. It's not getting better. It's actually getting worse. And so this is very important that it's a focus of the plan. And then climate change and extreme weather are affecting food producers, supply chains, and emergency food access folks. We're seeing this really in real time. Last year, with the intense droughts, most regions are still in a drought. And it is really, really important that we are able to adapt and to proactively build practices that are trying to reduce the effects of a changing climate. The fifth key finding is around workforce, succession, volunteer capacity. These are all vulnerabilities for the system. Often in interviews, it is difficult to find a consistent workforce. A lot of this work is seasonal, so there's already challenges around that. As Brenna mentioned earlier, we have an aging farming population, and finding succession either within the family or outside of the family can be really difficult. There are organizations that are working towards this, but it is a theme that comes up a lot. Within volunteerism, one of the things that we heard was just that emergency food systems are so reliant on volunteers that can actually be problematic in terms of building systems and solutions because you're so reliant on volunteerism and the goodness of people's ability and willingness to give back, but you're not able to have consistency and build long-term systems. And then the last key finding is around coordination in the region. We'll just say that, like, from our perspective, everyone was so incredibly willing to talk to us and to show us their organizations and their farms. So there's definitely a huge strength of the people who are part of this region. They're so generous, so hardworking. But this really needs to be sustained and also like celebrated and invested in. It's just the ability to coordinate amongst organizations and to bring people in. And I think, I saw this firsthand. I'm sure Alyssa did too in her interviews, but just people are incredibly generous and they want to be able to coordinate more. I think it is really difficult when people feel very stretched thin, both financially with the grants that are coming in, infrastructure wise, and just when you're only working with volunteers, it's really hard to know, like, if you have one staff, they're going to all the meetings, and that can really drain. It can be draining. So just building the ability for coordination through new ways to include more people at the table too, I would say. Can you go to the next slide, Brenna? So with this plan, we created this 10-year framework for action. 10 years seems like a really long time, but it will go by quite quickly. And in each, they're kind of short-term and long-term goals within the plan. One of the reasons that we did this is, you don't want to create this vision that you can't actually pace yourself to get to. So the shared vision of the plan is really, really important. It's crucial for creating like cohesion for the project, but also it can help guide future steps and be a beacon for the group that's working on implementation. The guiding principles of the plan include resilience, economic prosperity for the region, collaboration, access and opportunity, stewardship, innovation, and local leadership. And these were all things that we really felt like were part of the beauty of this area. It's like you have all of these amazing capacities, and you have a lot of people who can come to the table and help be part of these solutions. So within the framework for the 10 years, we have different goals, objectives, and actions. And like I said, they are split up between short term and long term. And I think that it's really important to think about what are the areas that you can tackle easily and have some wins, and then what are the things that you need to like be building over time. Can you go to the next slide? So there are 6 main goals for the project, and they are, based on the 6 key findings. And I'll just go over them, and you can read about them more in detail in the plan. But the first goal is about protecting and strengthening working lands and waters. So this means that really the focus is on at-risk lands and waterfronts and marine resources, and really trying to understand what are the priorities in the region, what are the areas that are most at risk and most important, how can we work to protect them and strengthen the viability of those spaces. Like I said in the beginning, once they're gone, and you can't do anything about that. So prioritizing areas that are most at risk across the project area is really crucial in the next steps. And we think probably the most urgent step. And luckily, you have some people on this call, and you have some projects that are already working on these types of things. And so that's another great thing. It's like you're already working on, like so many people are already working on this problem. The second piece is strengthening the viability of farms, fisheries, and food businesses. And, Brenna said this earlier, not people do not feel like they're actually able to make ends meet. A lot of people are not able to retire after working and running a farm business for many years. They end up selling their land as their retirement. So really trying to change the understanding of what is farm viability. It means that farmers can live in the area, that they can raise families in the area, that they can build towards retirement through their work, and that they can also enjoy the area. So this really is difficult as prices and land values are increasing all over the Commonwealth, but in specific in the project area. But really taking a hard look at like what does viability mean for farmers, and how do we get to the point, and fisher people and food businesses, and how do we get to the point where they are able to have viable businesses. And there are groups working towards this, so that's why it is already in everyone's mind, and it seems like a really important piece for this project to work on. The third piece is around infrastructure and supply chain capacity. There are gaps within infrastructure. There probably need to be more studies and more partnerships and collaborations to understand whether or not those gaps can be filled by existing businesses. So those are some of our activities, is to really start to understand those gaps in more detail, to be able to build a stronger, more resilient system. As Alyssa was talking about in emergency food providers, is it just having more of a hub where people can have cross docks and more drops, and some of these things are already in the works. So really trying to make sure that people are talking to each other, expressing what their needs are for infrastructure, and that we're building systems that are meeting multiple organizational needs. And the same goes for processing. Like when we interviewed Meatworks, some of the things that came up is that they are incredibly busy. People do have to book a year in advance, but they could maybe increase capacity with some different infrastructure, and then that could be a huge resource for the community. Then the fourth goal is to improve food access, security, and community well-being. And part of this, we saw, especially around emergency food, but also just affordability, and trying to build more win-win solutions and have people tap into some of the existing solutions that are there, like the HIP program, that's the Healthy Incentives Program that's run by the state. How do we increase redemption rates for that program, which helps support small farmers and low-income SNAP customers? So how can the region really improve food access through different existing programs, but also maybe coming up with other programs and other collaborations that can increase and improve food access. And some of this has to do with transportation and housing and many, many deeper issues. The fifth goal is to foster education, workforce, and food system awareness. You know, one of the things we saw was that there are many schools and organizations partnering with schools that are really working hard to create an awareness around local food, from school gardens to Harvest of the Month, and just building a little bit more collaboration across the region to make sure every school and all young people are getting that exposure, would be really important for just sparking that understanding at a young age. And then also working on building a workforce of people who are interested in regional food system work. This is a challenge for a lot of farms. It is seasonal work. It's really hard work. It's really hot work right now. But really making sure that there are programs that are building workforce pipelines. And then the last goal is around strengthening regional coordination, inclusion, and accountability. And I would say the important piece of this is really thinking about collaboration and inclusion need to go hand in hand. So as we're working on this project, who do we need at the table? How do we get people at the table? And by strengthening the inclusion of more people at the table, we can build better systems that really answer the issues of today, and that more people are involved in them. Go to the next slide. And so, Joanne, is this back to you or this is me?
Why don't we pass it on before we cover this end bit? Why don't we pass it over to Rita? She was able to
Oh, she's
finally
back.
join us. She's
Yes.
back. Yeah.
Okay.
So Rita, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm good.
Wonderful. Go
Figured
for it.
out the tech side. All right. So a quick jump over to the carrot, which was sort of a complementary and key part of the food system assessment. So first off, what is the carrot? CARROT stands for Community and Agriculture Resilience Audit Tool and was developed by Indiana University and the North American Food Systems Network. The purpose of the carrot is to measure resilience in the food system, which is the ability of your local food system to withstand disruptions, adapt to change, and recover quickly, while also continuing to provide healthy and accessible, sustainably grown food for community members. So I'm with the Marion Institute. As part of the Marion Institute, we are host of the South Coast Food Policy Council, which publishes a regional food system assessment every 5 years. We did our last one in 2021, and it was back in 2024 when we were reviewing priorities that came out of our 2021 assessment, and we were beginning to think about the updated 2026 version. We came across the carrot through one of our council members. We ended up being one of 12 organizations across the country to trial the carrot in our community. We began using the carrot tool to assess Bristol County and really quickly realized that it would add a whole new dimension to our food system assessment. And so we decided to launch a larger effort to conduct carrot assessments in all 6 of the southeastern counties in Massachusetts, or what we're thinking of as our interconnected food shed. So kind of the same way we think about a watershed, and how different parts of the watershed are interconnected, we apply the same kind of thinking to a food shed. So the carrot complements the quantitative data, the numbers that are coming out of a typical food system assessment that's looking at things like who's farming, how many farms, what are they growing, what are their annual sales. The carrot helps us understand what are the underlying structures that are supporting or restricting the local food system. What are the policies, what are the programs, projects, organizations that exist to support a local food system? And how resilient are those structures? Are the policies enforced? Are programs and projects funded in the long term? Is work fragmented? Is it collaborative? And so pulling these 2 types of information together, the numbers and then the underlying conditions, gives us a more complete picture of a local food system and informs what are the opportunities to expand, become more resilient, and really get an idea of how we're going to change those numbers the next time we do a food system assessment. Next slide. Okay, so the components of the carrot. First and foremost, the carrot's composed of 101 original indicators. These are the measures of resilience. 52 additional fishing and seafood indicators we added after starting the carrot in Barnstable County. We had excellent fisher representation in our first meeting, and they highlighted the lack of questions related to fishing and seafood, which is such an important part of Barnstable County food system as well as other counties in southeastern Mass. We worked with several fishing and seafood representatives from Barnstable to develop these 52 indicators, which mirrored our original carrot indicators and also reflected the broader Massachusetts Local Food Action Plan. These 153 indicators now are dispersed into 7 themes, which range from support for food producers, like farmers and fishers, protection of natural resources, food sovereignty, food equity, the ability for a community to be self-reliant, and community health and well-being. So it looks at more than, do you have more farmers and fishers than you did last year? And really looks at what systems do you have in place to support farming and fishing? Again, are there policies that protect farmland and working waterfronts? Are there programs that support new farmers and fishers? Are food producers represented in community planning decisions, including things like zoning or disaster management? Carrot really cuts across all aspects of a community that affect the food system through these 7 themes. Then what we do in order to conduct the carrot and to get at that baseline resilience assessment is form a community advisory board. The Plymouth County Carrot took us approximately 12 months. We formed our community advisory board with as broad a cross-section of community members as possible so we could gather as much information as possible, get different perspectives, and provide an opportunity for people from really different sectors in the county to connect and gain understanding of each other's roles in the food system. We met monthly to review indicators for each theme, and then we had 3 sessions to assign scores to each indicator. Next slide. Okay, so that scoring process looked a little bit like this. Protecting and preserving farmland is the very first indicator in the carrot. The Community Advisory Board reviewed the resources in Plymouth County for this indicator at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, and then assigned a score or a status ranging from no findings to established. One of the best ways to think about scoring is and how we were looking at the resources in Plymouth County related to each of these indicators is really thinking about a seed and the stages of a seed turning into a tree. So using this indicator, protecting and preserving farmland as an example, the question becomes, has the seed been planted? Are people discussing it? Has the seed become a tree? In our scoring process, the idea is that no findings would be, no one's even talking about it. We don't have any resources for this indicator. The seed hasn't even been planted. Being considered would say that the seed has been planted and it's being discussed, but no one's really taking care of it yet. No one's watering it yet. Being implemented would suggest that the seed is now seedling. So someone or maybe a couple organizations are working on it, putting resources into it. The effort's growing, but if any of those organizations walk away or the water runs out, the funding's maybe short term, this indicator won't make it, won't continue. And then established means there's multiple efforts, programs, policies, organizations that are supporting this indicator. There's long-term funding, and that little seed has actually become a tree that has enough resources to keep growing bigger. And this is one actually that we saw with this protection of farmland, is that this is one that has been identified as being urgent and needed. And there's a lot of resources there, but some of them are fragmented. And so it's somewhere between seedling, tree, and truly a mature tree. So the outcomes of the carrot are now, for every indicator, Plymouth County has a list of resources available for each of the indicators from the local level right up to the federal level. So this allows a community to understand whether the existing resources are being utilized, where do we need to direct more resources, and what are examples of successful resources or projects that can be replicated in other communities. It might be a local bylaw, it might be an open space plan that supports agriculture. There's all sorts of examples now of resources that are being utilized across the county that could be useful for other communities. The carrot provides a resilience score, which is really this overview of the food system. And thinking about using the forest analogy again, if you're imagining the food system as a forest and each of the indicators is a tree in the forest, we now have an understanding of where each of these indicators, each of these trees are, and what do we need to put resources into in order to create this forest. This is really our sense of gaps and opportunities, as well as an ongoing metric that we can come back to each time we review this and see how we've improved. The carrot gives us a shared language across sectors and across counties. To solve these complex food system issues, we need more conversation and more connection to other community members around food. Not everyone can see themselves in the food system. Carrot allows cross-sector conversation, identifies roles each of us plays in the food system, and then provides a shared language and shared metrics around resilience in the food system. And lastly, it gives us an idea of who are the organizations doing the work? What resources do they need to be further supported? And what are some of the projects that are examples of policies and programs that are having an impact and can be expanded or replicated? Next slide.
Rita, I just
So-
want to time check you. I want to make sure we have enough time for the audience to ask questions and
Oh
stuff.
my gosh. Okay, I'm almost done. So this is just a preview. There are 10 sort of larger findings that came out of the Plymouth County Carrot, and you can find them in the full report. And you'll see that these are reflected back in the recommendations that have been made in the broader local food action plan. And again, already what we've heard a bit from Lydia and from the Barrett team is that representation, inclusion in planning and decision making, growing the next generation of farmers through access to land, protecting natural resources, and equitable access to food are all part of the priorities. And then next slide. This is really about where does Carrot go next and how does this fit into the broader project. So we are continuing to refine our list of resources for Plymouth County. This is meant to be a living tool, so some of will be continuing to update our findings and refine them. So some of you will be hearing from us over the next few months. The Marion Institute will be pulling information from each of the 6 counties into a regional assessment that'll then be published at the end of the year and embed the Plymouth County Local Food Action Plan and priorities into this regional effort. And we hope to continue on with community advisory boards in some capacity. And that's us.
Thanks, Rita. So Brenna, if you want to skip back to the ending slides, we do have about 10 minutes for questions and comments from everybody. If there is anybody that can stick around a little bit longer if our conversation goes on, then feel free to do that. Everybody is always, of course, welcome to contact us after this as well, too. So for next steps, what we're planning on doing is hopefully establishing a regional implementation group. We're kind of thinking about this right now. If anybody has thoughts or suggestions, we welcome those very much. It may be a part of the Marion Institute's larger Food Policy Council. We might have like a county subgroup, for example. It may be something separate just for this project area. We're kind of exploring all the different options right now. But the idea is to have a group of folks in our area that are kind of looking at the plan, referencing what's already happening across our project area, and also leading forward some new initiatives. And to that end, we'll need to secure some funding. So we're looking for initial seed funding right now, opportunities through grants or foundation donations, things like that, to try and get a little bit of seed funding to help create this group so that we can organize the meetings, promote them and get people to attend them, and also put time and effort into actually finding funding sources to actually do the real implementation work. Communications and tracking progress are going to be really important. That's something that we really want to emphasize. You've heard from many of our speakers today a common theme that there is actually a lot happening already across all of these areas, but sometimes, you know, the right arm doesn't know what the left arm is doing. And there are gaps that still need to be filled. So tracking our progress, managing those communications, making sure that everybody's talking to each other about this stuff, and truly collaborating towards, you know, this larger goal of a resilient food system is what we're going to be focused on. The public comment period, if you could skip to the next slide, Brenna, lasts through Wednesday, June 24th. There are going to be 2 in-person sessions in Brockton and Plymouth coming up where we'll basically do a repeat of what you've heard today. Feel free, please, to join those. There's more information on our website, which is oldcolonyplanning.org/food resiliency. We can add that for the slide here in the future. Comments can be submitted to me via email or by snail mail if that's what you prefer. So please have a look at the plan. Please feel free to share all your thoughts and concerns about it. And we're really looking forward to hearing what folks have to think. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor to questions. If you'd like to raise your hand or put a comment or a question in the chat, we can take it that way as well too. Anybody got anything? Well, I have a question for the project team while folks are contemplating what they want to ask. I'm curious from Lydia's point of view. I know we have John, who is part of the team as well, and the folks over at Barrett. What really surprised you about, because I think we all went into this project with different perceptions about what we expected we'd find. And we've heard different things through different stakeholders over the years, but I'm curious to hear what you guys were really surprised about.
I can start. I was just so impressed by how much people were able to do, whether or not they were using grant programs or not, around infrastructure. And while there are gaps, I was just blown away by how many people were making things work on either on their own farms or in collaboration with others. And I think there are some really amazing farm businesses that are tapping into state funding in an incredible way and building really strong regional food infrastructure on their farms, and also kind of building up a lot of other farms in the process. And then the other piece I would say is I was so impressed to see so many farmers who are thinking about retirement and who are also thinking about supporting the younger generation getting into farming. It was really, really cool to hear. And also I was impressed by how generous everyone was with their time. So
I'll echo that a little bit, Lydia. I was so surprised by how many unique and cool business ideas are happening on farms. Farming is just one small bit of what's happening here. And I was so impressed. Everywhere we learned about, talked to, went, they have some of the most unique and cool business ideas I've ever heard.
Yeah, and I want to echo that too. I think we at OCPC we went into this with an economic development frame of mind, and it turned out to be such a bigger and broader project that truly touches on every part of society and every part of resilience. So yeah, so it's been really great. Okay, anybody else got any questions? John? Yeah. Oh, go ahead, John.
Well, I was struck by the fact that the inability for farmers to move product on, say, a wholesale basis was such a limiting factor to their production. They could produce more, but they would have difficulty moving much of their increased production in big numbers. And to me, that's a huge vulnerability. And I didn't really anticipate at all how widespread it was. But we heard that in a variety of different ways from a variety of different people. They're just working so hard. There's not the capacity to move more food. They didn't say there wasn't a capacity to grow more food. It was to profitably move it.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. The profitability of wholesale can be so challenging for certain size farms. And I think, John, you really that was something that came up as just that middle supply chain aggregation and moving, because you have big centers of Boston and Providence on either side of you, as well as all of your communities. So how is it moving? That was another piece that did come up about.
And we heard that on the seafood side, which is, I think, one of the things that shocked me most too, is that most of the seafood we're producing is actually not staying in the region. It's just going out everywhere else, which is wild. And then everything that I buy is usually not local.
Your two biggest products, cranberries and seafood, leave pretty much entirely.
Entirely. Yeah, it's crazy. Pine, you have your hand up?
Thanks, Joanne, and thanks everybody for the work. I really feel you and believe it's very, very important. I spent my first 15 years in the area as a cranberry grower, growing organically. And now I'm with the Watershed Association, as Joanne knows, and worked a little bit with them on the water plan. I think it's important to emphasize you don't have farming without water. And there's a lot of farming methods that do not take into consideration how vulnerable, especially this county is, in terms of our freshwater resources. We've done a lot to improve the bays. We're doing a lot still to get the sewage out and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of freshwater resources, we're not pairing the importance of agriculture with fish passage. You can't just stick your pump in the river and pump it so you have enough to flood the bogs without considering a time of year consequence. And it's very, very difficult, and especially because all of Plymouth County is essentially in the Plymouth County sole source aquifer, and the cranberry growers are turning to lowering all the pine barrens and stealing all the silica and digging into the groundwater table. We have lots of devastating impacts to the one resource nobody can go without. And I hope that there's a way to emphasize that in the plan, that having education about water resources, as the Marion Institute brought up in terms of, the watersheds, the watershed is a valuable tool for education. And, without flow in the rivers, there's no fish, not even in the ocean, because they need, the juveniles that are spawned here as food for those larger fisheries. It won't work otherwise. And I hope there's a way in the plan to bring that into some kind of focus so that, everybody's thinking about it, not just the watershed groups.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Pine. Yeah, those are really important points. We do touch on water issues a little bit in the plan. If you get the chance to review the details, we would love your feedback on whether, there are other ideas or whether we've missed the mark on some of them.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Pine. All right. Anybody else have any comments, questions? No? Project team, anybody have any last thoughts or anything you want to share before we conclude?
I think just one thing,
Mhm.
Joanne, on this slide that we like the next steps for the group. I think it's so important that you think about who you want at the table. All the people that were so generous with their time in interviews, most of them were not like that was not their job. They don't get compensated. For a lot of folks, like business owners, to show up, they don't get any compensation. So often we get a lot of folks who are in nonprofits or government who can show up because it's part of their job. So just thinking about having a really inclusive process for getting more people at the table with lived experience in the areas that you're trying to work on, I would say it really came out in the plan, and I think it's so hard to do, but it's so important. So we know you have your work cut out for you, but it is something to really keep in mind as you're building this next step, to bring in people who maybe aren't usually able to show up, and figure out how they can be compensated in some way potentially. So.
Thank you, Lydia. Okay. All right. Well, we're done for today. Just as a reminder, if you go to oldcolonyplanning.org/food resiliency, you'll find the plan. Comments are welcome through the 24th of this month. And there are a couple of other public presentations coming up as well, too. If you want to hear this all over again, or come share some more ideas, then please, you're very welcome to join. And those will have food. So that's another incentive. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.